On the day my husband, Dr. Mark Ellison, asked me for a divorce, he slid a check across the giant mahogany desk in his home office. $5,000. He called it a goodwill gesture. He said it with a look of pity, the kind you'd give a stray animal on the side of the road, something to be dealt with humanely, but quickly. "Anna," he said, his voice laced with a synthetic patience, as if explaining a complex diagnosis to a simple-minded patient. "I know this is hard, but you're just too dependent. You won't survive on your own. Consider this a fresh start." I just nodded, my hand trembling theatrically, agreeing to everything he wanted. A week later, as I was sipping my coffee in the kitchen, I heard his voice cracking through the thick walls. He was in his office, shouting into the phone. "What do you mean, repo? That's my car. I made the payments." 3 days after that, a polite man in an expensive suit hand-delivered a legal envelope to him. It was from my lawyer, a 30-day notice to vacate the premises, the house he finally understood, after 5 years of living in it, that I'd never once said was mine. Everything had truly started to unravel 3 weeks earlier at the St. Jude Hospital's annual charity gala. It was the social pinnacle of Mark's world, and for me, it was my own personal annual hell. The ballroom air was suffocating, thick with expensive perfume, buttery lobster, and the murmur of self-congratulation. Mark stood at the center of it all, a spotlight seeming to find him as naturally as gravity. Dr. Mark Ellison, the city's star cardiac surgeon, the man with the golden hands and the $1,000,000 smile, was radiating charisma and misplaced pride. He looked perfect in his Tom Ford tuxedo, his cuffs revealing just enough of the Patek Philippe watch he believed he'd bought himself with his bonus. He moved between clusters of people, clapping administrators on the back, laughing at the right jokes from the right donors. And I was his shadow, Anna, the broke artist wife, clutching a glass of cheap Prosecco I'd snagged from a passing tray. I stood there in the same simple black dress I'd worn for the last 5 years. It was a nice dress once, but in this sea of bespoke silk and diamonds, it felt like a confession. Mark didn't notice or pretended not to until he saw his colleagues looking at me. I saw the moment. He was talking to Dr. Harrison, the hospital administrator, and his wife. Mrs. Harrison's eyes flicked over me, a rapid up and down scan that said everything, unsuitable. Mark smiled, a brittle expression that didn't reach his eyes, and put his hand on my waist, pulling me in. "There you are, honey. Dr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison, this is my wife, Anna." "A pleasure to meet you," Dr. Harrison said, giving me a limp handshake. His wife just nodded, her smile paper-thin. "Anna is an artist," Mark added, his tone laced with a false pride that barely masked his embarrassment. "She's incredibly creative." He used the word creative the way you describe a child's scribbles, polite but dismissive. "She sells these cute little paintings on Etsy, don't you, honey?" I smiled, a gesture I had practiced to perfection. "Something like that. It's just a small hobby." "How charming," Mrs. Harrison said, before turning right back to Mark. "Now, Mark, about the golf tournament this weekend." I just stood there, a useless ornament, glass in hand. Mark had already released me, turning his back to me slightly to engage in the more important conversation. I understood. I was the mandatory accessory, the proof that he had a stable home life, but one that was decidedly off-brand. I felt the eyes of the other wives. They were lawyers, executives, philanthropists with their names on buildings. I was the Etsy wife. Then the air shifted. Mark's attention snapped away. I didn't need to look to know who had arrived. Camilla Reyes, the hospital's new chief operating officer, glided toward us. She was wearing a red gown that I knew cost more than Mark's monthly salary, at least the salary I allowed him to believe he earned. Her black hair was in a perfect chignon, and she moved with the predatory confidence of a panther. "Mark," she purred, her voice like honey, ignoring me completely. Her perfectly manicured red fingernail tapped the lapel of his tuxedo. "Everyone is buzzing about the Ellison Heart Center. Securing that private funding was genius. A completely anonymous benefactor. That's impressive." Mark's chest puffed out. He was basking in her admiration. "It's all about the vision, Camilla. You have to take risks. Someone has to be the financial heavyweight in the family, right?" He laughed, and she laughed with him, a sound like breaking glass. His hand, the one that hadn't touched me with any affection in months, now rested on the small of my back, a possessive gesture for onlookers, but I felt the coldness of it, a signal of his impatience. Her perfume, Frederick Malle, was overpowering. It was the same scent I'd been smelling on his scrubs, on his pillowcases for the last 3 months. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was too lost in my colorful blobs to notice. The ride home was a heavy silence. The Porsche 911 Turbo, his pride and joy, sliced through the night. I watched the city lights blur past the window, my own face a blank reflection. Mark gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The silence stretched until we were on the freeway, where the engine's roar drowned out everything. And then the performance ended. God, Anna, is it that hard? He didn't look at me, just stared at the road ahead. To just stand there and smile. "You can't even do that. You looked like you were about to pass out. Harrison's wife actually asked me if you were feeling okay. You're embarrassing me." I stayed quiet, continuing to watch the window. "I'm out there saving lives," he snapped, his voice rising with the car's RPM. "I'm building an empire, raising millions of dollars, and you can't even hold a decent conversation about the weather. I carry everything, Anna. All of it. Don't you understand the pressure I'm under? You live in your own little bubble, painting your useless things while I do the real work." I turned to him, at the man I had once loved, the man who now looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. "I understand," I said softly. "No, you don't. You know nothing about the real world. I'm tired of dragging you along. I'm tired of apologizing for you. You'd better start acting a little more grateful." We pulled up to the waterfront mansion Mark loved to call his estate. He slammed the door of the Porsche and marched straight to the bar in the great room for a scotch. The clink of ice against glass echoed in the silent hall. "I'm going to my studio," I said quietly, slipping off my heels. "Right," he scoffed, loosening his tie. "Go paint your colorful little blobs. Maybe one day you'll actually sell one." I walked down the hall to my studio. From the outside, it looked exactly as he described it, a hobby room, a simple oak door. Inside, which he had only glanced into once years ago, was a deliberate, curated mess. A few canvases leaned against a wall, a cluttered easel, paint-splattered floors, and the sharp scent of turpentine. He declared it filthy and never set foot in it again. I closed the door. I locked it. Then I walked to the far wall, the one that looked like exposed brick. I pressed my thumb against a specific, slightly loose brick. There was no sound, but a sensor was triggered. I walked to an old bookcase and pulled a thick volume of art history. A nearly inaudible hydraulic hiss sounded. The entire brick wall, just a thin facade, slid away, revealing not a messy art space, but a command center. The room was bathed in the cool blue light of 6 massive 4K monitors mounted on the wall. Servers hummed softly in a climate-controlled rack in the corner. The air was cool and filtered. This was my real studio. Mark thought I sold cute little paintings on Etsy, and I did. I maintained that Etsy shop meticulously, paying an assistant overseas to run it, ensuring it pulled in about $400 a month. It was the perfect cover, a plausible explanation for why I spent so much time in my studio. Because in the art world and in the financial world, I wasn't Anna Ellison. I was Eon. I was the anonymous digital artist whose installations, massive, complex, data-driven artworks, sold for millions at Sotheby's and Christie's. My work hung in private collections in Zurich, in museums in Tokyo, and in the lobbies of Silicon Valley tech giants. My NFT collections, released under the Eon identity, would sell out in seconds, generating sums of money Mark couldn't even comprehend. I never told him. When I met Mark, he was a brilliant resident drowning in $300,000 of student debt. I was already Eon, already financially set, but I hid it. He had a savior complex. He needed to feel like the provider, the white knight, the hero. He had fallen in love with Anna the struggling artist, and I had fallen in love with the man he was then. I had loved his fire, his ambition, the way he genuinely believed he could change the world. I thought if he knew I was wealthier than he could ever imagine, his fragile, ferocious ego would have shattered. So I let him save me. I let him pay for our cheap dinners with his maxed out credit cards, while I secretly paid off his student loans through an anonymous scholarship fund my shell company has set up for that exact purpose. I let him believe his surgeon's salary supported our life. I let him believe he was the breadwinner, the decision maker. It was a mistake, one born from love, and now it had rotten into this contempt. I wasn't just an artist. I was a businesswoman. I sat down in the Herman Miller chair at the console and logged into the secure portal. The screens lit up with my Swiss bank accounts, my crypto wallets, and the LLCs I operated. The balance? 9 figures. I pulled up the files, the digital breadcrumbs of the life Mark thought was his. File 1, the property, the deed to this $14 million waterfront mansion. I clicked the scanned PDF. Buyer, Eon Trust, LLC. An LLC I had established in Delaware 3 years before our wedding. Mark's name was nowhere on the deed. His name wasn't even on the mortgage, because there was no mortgage. The house had been a cash purchase. File 2, the vehicles. The lease agreement for his precious Porsche 911 Turbo. I smiled bitterly. Lessee, Eon Trust, LLC. The monthly payment was auto-drafted from one of my business accounts. He didn't even know which bank held the lease. File 3, the clinic. This was my favorite. His genius, the Ellison Heart Center, the private funding he had secured. I pulled up the signed contract Camilla had mentioned. The mysterious benefactor, the anonymous donor who had provided the $5 million seed grant and was leasing him the Class A office space and state-of-the-art medical equipment, was Eon Trust, LLC. He was building his empire on my foundation, all while calling me dead weight. He was bragging to his mistress about his vision, completely unaware that the very wife he was cheating on had funded his entire dream. He thought he was the star surgeon and I was just the broke artist living in his shadow. He had no idea I wasn't the shadow. I was the one casting it. The next morning, the illusion of our marriage felt brittle, like a thin sheet of ice I was afraid to step on. Mark was already in his star surgeon mode, barking into his phone about surgical schedules and complaining that his favorite blue tie was missing from the closet. He was rushing, his arrogance amplified by a self-imposed sense of urgency. He grabbed his briefcase, kissed the air somewhere near my cheek, and was out the door in a cloud of his expensive cologne and self-importance. It wasn't until 10 minutes later that I saw it, lying on the kitchen island next to his empty espresso cup, his iPad. This was a rookie mistake for a man planning a secret life. His iPad, his phone, his laptop, they were all seamlessly synced. He was so convinced of my incompetence, so certain that I was just his Etsy wife, that he didn't even consider the possibility of me looking. I hadn't before. I had respected his privacy, clinging to the naive belief that the man I loved was still in there somewhere. Now, I felt nothing but a cold, surgical curiosity. I picked it up. The screen was dark, but as I touched it, it lit up with a string of notifications. They were all from Camilla Hospital. Camilla Hospital. Last night was incredible. Camilla Hospital. He's going to be furious about the new scheduling. Let me handle him. Camilla Hospital? Did you tell her yet? I can't wait for this to be over. Camilla Hospital, call me when you get a chance, superstar. We need to celebrate our new life. My fingers felt numb as I opened the messages. It was all there, a running log of their affair. Explicit and arrogant, but it was the thread from 2 days ago, a conversation with a name I didn't recognize, Harrison Blackwood Esquire, that made my blood run cold. It was a group chat. Mark, Camilla, and his new lawyer. He hadn't even had the decency to remove his mistress from the conversation about his divorce. I scrolled to the top, my heart hammering a dull, heavy beat against my ribs. Mark, Harrison, just to confirm, the house is mine. I'm the sole provider. She has zero income aside from some art hobby that probably costs more than it makes. Blackwood Esquire. Correct. Given her demonstrated financial dependency, the court will almost certainly view her as the dependent party. We will argue for the house as your primary asset, purchased with your earnings. Mark. Perfect. And her name isn't on the deed, right? I handled all that. Blackwood Esquire. I'll pull the title, but if you're the sole name on the mortgage and deed, she has no claim. We'll offer her a standard minimal spousal support package for a short duration. Camilla. And we can sell it immediately. I hate that wallpaper. Mark. As soon as she's out. We can use the equity to fund the Beverly Hills Clinic. I told you I had a plan. Mark. I'll tell her on Friday. I'm telling her I'm drowning in debt from the new clinic, so our marital assets are basically zero. The poor thing will believe anything I say. Camilla. You're a genius, Mark. It's finally time to drop the dead weight. Dead weight. The room spun for a second. Dead weight. He had called me dead weight while planning to steal a house he didn't own to fund a clinic I was paying for to start a new life with his mistress. My money, my house, my clinic. He was a parasite who thought he was the host. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it nearly knocked the wind out of me. I stood there, gripping the cold marble of the countertop, and the last remnants of the woman who had loved Mark Ellison turned to dust. The woman who replaced her was Eon, and Eon was methodical. I needed more than text messages. I needed a fortress of evidence. His entire plan hinged on a lie that he was the provider and I was the dependent. I needed to prove not just his infidelity, but the precise mathematical totality of his fraud. His laptop, that was the key. He guarded it like a dragon, but I knew his weakness, his image. Later that afternoon, when he was in surgery, I put my plan into action. I made a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, just how he liked it. I walked into his pristine home office, the one the Eon Trust paid for the decorators, and tripped. The entire cup of hot black coffee went cascading over his closed MacBook Pro. I screamed, a pitch-perfect performance of wifely panic. I immediately called his office, leaving a frantic, sobbing voicemail for his assistant. "I'm so sorry. I ruined it. I'll get it fixed, I promise." I didn't take it to the Apple Store. I had been vetting specialists for months, ever since I first smelled Camilla's perfume on his clothes. I drove 40 minutes to a nondescript office building in an industrial park. The sign on the door said, "Advanced Data Recovery." The man inside, Thomas, was a retired digital forensics investigator for the FBI. He was Eon's PI. "Thomas," I said, placing the damp laptop on his workbench, "my husband is cheating on me. I need you to mirror the entire hard drive, everything. Emails, hidden files, browser history, financial records. I need it all." "The coffee was a nice touch, Miss Ellison," he said without looking up from the machine. "Gives me the perfect excuse to do a deep-level extraction. Call me in 24 hours. I spent the next day in a fugue state, going through the motions. I went to the grocery store. I bought salmon for dinner, Mark's favorite. I even tinkered in my hobby studio, splashing paint on a canvas while my mind raced. Mark came home furious about the laptop, but my tearful, dependent apology disarmed him. He spent the evening complaining about the incompetence of the surgical staff and the idiot who had scheduled his morning, all while I nodded and refilled his wine glass. The perfect, supportive, brainless wife. The call from Thomas came the next afternoon, precisely at the 24-hour mark. I locked myself in the real studio to take it. "Well, you were right," Thomas said, his voice flat. "He's cheating. Camilla Reyes. I've got 1,000 messages, photos, hotel receipts. It's airtight." "Good," I said, feeling a cold sense of validation. "That's what I need." "That's not all," he interrupted. "You didn't hire me to be a marriage counselor, Miss Ellison. But your husband isn't just a cheater. He's a mess. I found a hidden set of financial statements. He's got a massive gambling problem. Online poker, offshore sports betting. He's down almost $200,000 in the last 6 months alone." This was new. A shiver went down my spine. Mark, the image of control, was a gambling addict. It explained his new obsession with our finances, his desperation to sell the house. "It gets worse," Thomas said, and I heard him click a mouse. "He knows he's not on the deed to your house. He must have found out when he tried to secure a loan against it. 3 months ago, he applied for a $200,000 second mortgage. The bank, obviously, denied it when they ran the title search and found Eon Trust LLC. But that's not the interesting part." "What's the interesting part, Thomas?" "The application itself. He listed himself as the primary borrower and Anna Ellison as co-borrower and co-owner. He needed your signature on the application, so he provided one. He emailed me the file. I opened it. There on page 4 of the Uniform Residential Loan Application was my name, Anna Ellison. But I had never seen this document in my life. It was a crude digital forgery of my signature, one he must have lifted from an old check or a thank you card. He forged my signature?" I whispered, staring at the screen. The room felt 10 degrees colder. "That's a felony, Miss Ellison," Thomas said quietly. "Bank fraud. He didn't just lie to his lawyer. He committed a federal crime. He's not just a cheater. He's a criminal. And you have the proof." I hung up the phone. The shock gave way to a terrifying, crystalline clarity. This was no longer a divorce. It was a demolition. He hadn't just insulted my intelligence. He had tried to steal from me, criminally. He had tried to leverage my asset, an asset held by my corporation, by forging my name. The man I had once loved wasn't just arrogant. He was dangerous. And he was stupid. So incredibly, fatally stupid. I sat there for an hour, in the blue glow of my monitors, the evidence laid out before me, the affair, the gambling debts, the bank fraud. My mind, the mind of Eon, began to build a new structure, not an artwork, but a legal trap. I swiveled in my chair and initiated a secure video call. Thousands of miles away, a screen flickered to life. "Sarah," I said. Sarah Evans was the lead counsel for Eon Trust. She was a shark in a Chanel suit, a corporate lawyer based in Zurich who managed all my international contracts and, more importantly, my anonymity. She knew my entire structure because she had helped me build it. "Anna," she said, her expression sharp, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right with the London installation?" "The installation is fine, Sarah. My marriage is not." I spent the next 30 minutes laying it all out. The dependent wife persona, the years of financial deception, Mark's affair with Camilla, his plan to divorce me and claim the house, and finally the crown jewel, the loan application, the forgery. She listened, without interrupting, her face a mask of professional neutrality. When she finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Anna," she said, leaning into her camera, "he's an arrogant fool. He's not just divorcing you. He's trying to defraud a multi-million-dollar corporation. And he's done it while committing bank fraud. He hasn't just given you grounds for divorce. He's given you grounds for his complete and utter ruin." "So what do I do?" I asked. "You do," Sarah said. "Absolutely nothing. For now." The plan she laid out was brilliant, ruthless, and worthy of Eon. First, I was not to breathe a word of Eon, the LLC, or the real ownership of the house. I was to let Mark file for divorce. I was to let him walk into his lawyer's office and lie, claiming he was the sole provider. I was to submit his fraudulent financial disclosures to the court. "Let him commit perjury, Anna," Sarah said, her eyes gleaming. "Let him swear under oath that he owns that house and that you have no income. Let him build his entire case on that lie." Second, I was to hire a separate lawyer, a local, run-of-the-mill, aggressive divorce attorney. "Find someone who specializes in emotional, high-conflict divorces," Sarah advised. "You will tell this new lawyer only about the affair. You will not mention Eon. You will not mention the house. Your entire case, as far as Mark and Blackwood are concerned, is that of a scorned wife fighting for a fair settlement from her cheating, wealthy husband." We pulled up to the waterfront mansion Mark loved to call his estate. He slammed the door of the Porsche and marched straight to the bar in the great room for a scotch. The clink of ice against glass echoed in the silent hall. "I'm going to my studio," I said quietly, slipping off my heels. "Right," he scoffed, loosening his tie. "Go paint your colorful little blobs. Maybe one day you'll actually sell one." I walked down the hall to my studio. From the outside, it looked exactly as he described it, a hobby room, a simple oak door. Inside, which he had only glanced into once years ago, was a deliberate, curated mess. A few canvases leaned against a wall, a cluttered easel, paint-splattered floors, and the sharp scent of turpentine. He declared it filthy and never set foot in it again. I closed the door. I locked it. Then I walked to the far wall, the one that looked like exposed brick. I pressed my thumb against a specific, slightly loose brick. There was no sound, but a sensor was triggered. I walked to an old bookcase and pulled a thick volume of art history. A nearly inaudible hydraulic hiss sounded. The entire brick wall, just a thin facade, slid away, revealing not a messy art space, but a command center. The room was bathed in the cool blue light of 6 massive 4K monitors mounted on the wall. Servers hummed softly in a climate-controlled rack in the corner. The air was cool and filtered. This was my real studio. Mark thought I sold cute little paintings on Etsy, and I did. I maintained that Etsy shop meticulously, paying an assistant overseas to run it, ensuring it pulled in about $400 a month. It was the perfect cover, a plausible explanation for why I spent so much time in my studio. Because in the art world and in the financial world, I wasn't Anna Ellison. I was Eon. I was the anonymous digital artist whose installations, massive, complex, data-driven artworks, sold for millions at Sotheby's and Christie's. My work hung in private collections in Zurich, in museums in Tokyo, and in the lobbies of Silicon Valley tech giants. My NFT collections, released under the Eon identity, would sell out in seconds, generating sums of money Mark couldn't even comprehend. I never told him. When I met Mark, he was a brilliant resident drowning in $300,000 of student debt. I was already Eon, already financially set, but I hid it. He had a savior complex. He needed to feel like the provider, the white knight, the hero. He had fallen in love with Anna the struggling artist, and I had fallen in love with the man he was then. I had loved his fire, his ambition, the way he genuinely believed he could change the world. I thought if he knew I was wealthier than he could ever imagine, his fragile, ferocious ego would have shattered. So I let him save me. I let him pay for our cheap dinners with his maxed out credit cards, while I secretly paid off his student loans through an anonymous scholarship fund my shell company has set up for that exact purpose. I let him believe his surgeon's salary supported our life. I let him believe he was the breadwinner, the decision maker. It was a mistake, one born from love, and now it had rotten into this contempt.
Mark actually scoffed. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together, adopting the patronizing tone of a surgeon explaining a simple procedure. "Anna," he said, ignoring Jessica and speaking directly to me. "Let's be realistic. What assets? I'm shouldering massive debt from the clinic. You have no income. You haven't had a real job in 5 years. You're an artist, a failed one." "That's not true," I whispered, playing my part. "My Etsy shop." "Your Etsy shop?" Mark laughed. Blackwood smirked. "Anna, I am the sole contributor. I am the only one with an income. The court will see that. It will see that I am a surgeon and you do a hobby. This house," he said, gesturing expansively, "this life, it's all built on my earnings." Blackwood slid a document across the table. It was a settlement offer. "Dr. Ellison is being generous," he said in a voice as smooth as oil. "He will not pursue you for the debts you've incurred as a household. He is offering you a one-time goodwill payment of $5,000, and you will have 7 days to vacate his residence. Sign it, Anna. It's the best deal you're going to get." Mark stared at me, his eyes cold. This was it, the final contemptuous dismissal. "Sign it, Anna," he repeated, his voice softer, trying to sound kind. "It's time to be realistic. You're a dependent party." I looked at the paper. I looked at Jessica, who looked back with practiced fury. Then I looked at Mark. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. "You're right," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's all very clear." I picked up the heavy, gold-plated pen from Blackwood's desk. Mark's shoulders relaxed. He had won. He exchanged a subtle, triumphant smile with his lawyer. I signed my name, Anna Ellison, with a flourish. I had just agreed to give him nothing, because nothing was precisely what he legally owned. "I'm glad you see reason," Blackwood said, gathering the papers. Mark stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He didn't look at me again. He just walked out of the room, already on his phone, no doubt calling Camilla to tell her the dead weight had been dropped. He didn't know that my signature wasn't an act of surrender. It was a trigger. It was the signal Sarah was waiting for. He thought he had just won his freedom. He had no idea he had just activated the kill switch on his entire life. He thought he had another week of playing the king. He had about 12 hours. The next morning, I was up at dawn. I sat in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, watching the sun rise over the water. It was 8 a.m. Showtime. Right on schedule, I heard the roar of a heavy engine outside. Mark was in the shower, whistling. He was always in a good mood after a win. I walked to the living room window and watched as a massive tow truck authorized by Eon Trust LLC backed up our driveway. The driver, efficient and precise, began hooking the Porsche 911 Turbo. The shower shut off. I heard Mark shouting, "What is that? What the hell is that noise?" He appeared at the top of the stairs, dripping wet, a towel hastily wrapped around his waist, his face a mask of confusion and rage. He looked out the window. "What are they doing? That's my car." He sprinted down the stairs and ran out onto the lawn, shouting at the driver, "Get away from my car! I'll have you arrested!" The driver ignored him and simply handed him a piece of paper. The repossession order from Eon Trust LLC for non-payment on the corporate lease. "Eon Trust?" Mark screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. "Who the hell is Eon Trust?" And then his phone, sitting on the kitchen counter, began to ring. The caller ID read, "Harrison Blackwood, Esquire." I put it on speaker. Blackwood's voice, no longer smooth or oily, was high-pitched, panicked. Mark, pick up. We have a catastrophic problem. I just got a call from a lawyer in Zurich, from some corporation. Mark, you lied to me. You don't own the house. You never owned the house. It's owned by Eon Trust LLC. The entire divorce filing is fraudulent. It's based on an asset you have no claim to. Mark had stumbled back inside, clutching the repossession order, his face pale. He was looking at the phone, then at me. His phone buzzed again, an email. It was from the hospital's legal department. I could read the subject line from across the room. Urgent. Notice of immediate suspension and investigation. "What is this?" he whispered. "That," I said, my voice calm, "is probably about the clinic." "The clinic?" "The one Eon Trust LLC funded. The one Eon Trust LLC is now defunding, effective immediately, due to a morals clause violation. I believe that was your affair with Camilla." He stared at me. The pieces were clicking into place, but they were forming a picture his ego couldn't accept. What did you do?" "Me?" I picked up my coffee mug. It was a simple black mug, one he'd never paid attention to. On the side, in small white letters, was the logo for the Sotheby's auction where my piece, Binary Sunset, had sold for $4.2 million. He'd seen me drink from it every morning for a year. "Eon,"
he whispered, his eyes finally landing on the mug. "Eon, who are you?" I set the mug down and turned my laptop on the island to face him. The screen was open to the Eon Trust portal, my portfolio, the 9-figure balance, the deeds, the lease agreements, and finally the scanned copy of the loan application he had submitted to the bank, the one with my forged signature.
"You called me a failed artist," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the view from our window. "You're right. I failed at being the stupid, dependent woman you needed me to be. My hobby, Mark, my Etsy shop, it paid for your medical school. It paid for this house. It paid for that Porsche they're towing. It paid for the clinic you were planning to steal. And it paid for the watch on your wrist." His knees buckled. He grabbed the counter to hold himself up, the towel slipping. "And then you got greedy," I continued, walking over to him. "You didn't just cheat. You didn't just lie. You committed a crime. You forged my name on a federal loan application for a property you didn't own." I slid a new document across the island. This one wasn't from a tow truck company. It was from my real lawyer. That's a copy of the criminal complaint EonTrust.LLC filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office this morning for bank fraud. You're not just losing your house, Mark. You're about to lose your medical license. He collapsed. He just fell to the floor, a pathetic, dripping heap of arrogance, finally broken. I stepped around him and picked up the last piece of paper from the counter. I let it flutter down onto his lap. "This is a 30-day eviction notice. You wanted me out in 7 days. I'm giving you 30. Consider it a goodwill gesture." I walked back to my coffee, leaving him sobbing on the floor of my kitchen. He called me dead weight. He called me dependent. He was right. His entire fraudulent life was dependent on the wife he never bothered to see. Last week, my newest piece went to auction. It's a digital installation, a self-destructing algorithm based on his forged signature. I call it The Surgeon's Hand. It sold for $7 million. So here's the question I have for all of you. Anna had the power to stop this at any time. When she first discovered the cheating, she could have confronted him. Instead, she waited, gathered evidence, and let him walk right into a trap that didn't just end their marriage, but ended his entire career. Was Anna's revenge justified, or was it a calculated, cold-blooded destruction that went too far? Let me know in the comments. Team justified or team too far? I want to know what you would have done.